Hey everyone. Can you hear me okay? Cool. Firstly, I just want to say thanks for coming to the talk. Hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. I think NDC always puts on a great show. Just want to say thanks. I've been to a few of these NDCs now. Yeah, it's just a great opportunity to meet so many interesting people, go to some great talks. If you do like NDC, some of the other events are pretty cool. I would say Porto is one of my favorites. Great location, great vibe, great venue. So that's worth putting on your calendar. In this session today, I'm going to talk about architecture modernization. Maybe if you've got some legacy and you're thinking, we might invest some time and money into modernizing that legacy, spending a year, 2 years, even a longer period. Hopefully, some of the ideas in this talk might be relevant, give you some things to think about. But the first question we always have to ask really is it worth it? Does our company need to modernize? If you're a successful company, making money, revenue's coming in, you're a market leader, why spend money refactoring legacy when you can just keep building new stuff? I think it's a very important question, and we always have to look at that perspective. As much as we might be dealing with difficult legacy, it might not be worth modernizing. What are some of the reasons? So we talked about company has market share. Customers know your brand. Big, well-known brand in your industry. Even if a competitor, even if a startup comes along and builds a better product, they still have to convince all your customers that they can be trusted, that they're reliable. And even if they have a much better product, customers still might use you and be loyal to you. You've got big budgets, existing revenue streams. You can afford to hire the best people, do more research and development. Yeah, you might not need to modernize. Obviously, there are many cases where you do need to modernize. I'm sure we've all been in this situation or seen signs of this throughout our career. Legacy systems that are difficult to work with, unreliable, hard to hire people, nobody wants to work in old tech stacks. And then as legacy builds up and it becomes more unreliable, we build processes and bureaucracy around it, making sure we don't break it, putting governance in place. Everything gets slowly. And so at this point, the balance starts to change. Our brand reputation might not be enough to protect us from these younger, smaller companies. And they might have an advantage. They don't have all this legacy, so that they can outcompete us. So in that case, it probably does make sense to modernize. Good example of this was OpenTable, around 10, maybe a bit longer, early 2010s, I think it was. My friend Orlando worked there. I know quite a few people that worked there. And one of the key takeaways from OpenTable's story is that they recognized early enough that they needed to modernize. They could see that new competitors had entered the industry. They were building features faster. And they felt like if we don't do something in the next year or two, we might not be the market leader anymore. In OpenTable's case, they actually stopped all feature development work and modernized for like 8 or 9 months. Could have taken 2 or 3 years. They were like, let's just do it all as a big project. I'm not advocating that approach. There were reasons why it worked there. Notably, they did hire some of the industry's smartest people, so they were able to make it work. But you don't have to do it that way. But I think noticing early is always a good sign. And one of the questions I like to ask people is, if you did nothing and carried on as you are now, how long would it be until your competitors overtook you and it became a major problem? You know, some people say, oh, we've got like 3 years. Maybe there's not enough pressure or concern there to actually modernize. You just won't get enough buy-in for it. Sometimes people say we're already at that position. That's also not a good situation to be in because you start to rush and take shortcuts and look for silver bullets. Sometimes people say something like 18 months or 2 years, and I feel like that's a really good period to notice because you've got time, you don't need to rush, you can do things properly, but you know, there's some risk and there's some pressure there, so you do need to do something. And there's another point about modernization, which I think is really important, is even if you make great decisions, even if you design the best architecture over a long period of time, eventually there will be assumptions you made based on certain factors or constraints, and they don't hold anymore. Something's changed. And so decisions that you made in the past that were perfect at the time, suddenly they put you in a situation where your architecture is not ideal anymore, and it could be quite some way from where you'd like it to be. So even just changes that you weren't anticipating, didn't expect, or did expect but didn't take seriously, those things can mean you need to modernize, even if you've not done anything significantly wrong in the past. Good example of this is Vinted. So, as Ornella's talking about here, basically Vinted started out in a single vertical, in a single industry, which was women's clothing. Don't know much about women's clothing, don't know much about men's clothing, don't know much about clothing, fashion, or anything in general, but you can still get the key point of this story. They built this system, they built this architecture around the whole premise of we sell women's clothing. As any company, as most companies do, they want to grow. Oh, how do we grow as a company? We've maximized what we can achieve in this market. We need to move into other markets, into other verticals. So now they're selling different kinds of products, moving into different verticals, but they've got a system that's been built around abstractions that are optimized for women's clothing. What do you do here? Do you rebuild the whole system so it supports multiple verticals in an elegant way? Or do you try and build the new features on top of the existing ones because it's much quicker to do that? Most of the time, we take the second approach, and that's why over time, we add layers onto these foundations that were built for a different purpose. And eventually, the mismatch there, the compromises can be so much that you need to modernize. So I would say, when I think about modernization, it's really about converting something that's giving your business a disadvantage on a business level to something that is an advantage, and enables you to move quickly, as OpenTable discovered. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about three different topics. The first one, I think, is around the mindset of what you need to modernize for. Very often these days, it's about flow. People want to be able to move quickly, develop new features faster, and that's basically flow. How can we design an architecture that enables our business to change and improve at the pace we want? Then I'll talk about a few tools that I think are quite effective, tools I use myself. You might disagree, that's okay. And then I'll talk a bit about, at the end, how you can organize yourselves, how architects can fit into this process to start a modernization journey on the right foot and keep things moving, because I would say getting started, keeping something moving, even if you have the best design, that's probably the hardest bit in my experience. So let's talk about the first topic, architecting for flow. So first key point here is, if you are modernizing, you've got some old legacy system, just changing the tech and infrastructure will give you some benefits. Modern infrastructure might be easier to deploy, easier to scale, easier to support in production. Modern programming languages and frameworks give you new features, make you more productive. But the tech alone isn't going to fix all of the coupling in your system. It won't fix all those bad abstractions we talked about. So modernization needs to be a bit deeper, a bit more systemic than just about the technology itself. And so nowadays, we think about the value stream of building new features, of making changes to our systems. And if you've read books like Team Topologies, read stuff in the product management space like Marty Kagan, Melissa Perry, where the industry has moved to a place where teams are taking more ownership of changing their software, deploying it to production, supporting it in production, but also upstream as well, defining their own OKRs, shaping their own roadmaps. And so when this is done well, a team is able to take some high-level business goal and discover what to build it, to deploy it to production, and there are a few handovers, a few blockers, so that work flows through the organization quicker. So that's what we want to get to. We have to be careful of hidden coupling, or if you've read any of Adam Thornhill's stuff or seen CodeScene, he calls this change coupling, where we might not have a clear physical coupling between different parts of our system, but to implement new features, we have to change multiple code bases at the same time. So we have to be careful of this. We can't just say, we've got these decoupled applications that run independently. We have to look for that hidden change coupling as well. That's the key to a loosely coupled architecture. And so I think a good architect is looking at the value stream and looking how can we make these value streams independent. And I think there are 4 factors which I kind of touched on. The first one is about being domain aligned. So if you align your value stream to a particular subdomain in your business, then what you're trying to achieve is changes, new features that fit in one subdomain and therefore can be handled in this area. But to make good decisions, to identify the value of each value stream, to understand if you're investing the right effort, making the right architectural trade-offs, you need to know the business outcomes you're optimizing for. I don't think it's possible to do architecture without clear business outcomes, because there's a lot of trade-offs, and you need to know what are we optimizing for. Speed, reducing costs, existing customers, new customers. Those outcomes are really key to doing this effectively. Then the team has to be empowered to make those changes. If they're waiting for permission or approval outside the team, those are the kind of bottlenecks and wait times that can really kill your flow. And then for the team to be able to use that autonomy, they have to own the software for their value stream so that they can deploy it on an as-needed basis. Once a day, multiple times per day. That's kind of where the industry is nowadays. Good example of this is ICE. It's a copyright company. Their job is to calculate royalties, make sure artists get paid the right amount. It's a very complex domain. My friend Casper works there. Did a bit of work with them myself. And they went on this journey, and I think they hit all of these things really well. They touched on all of those points really well. In the early days, they had a very technology-driven architecture. Things had grown organically. The kind of architecture, I would say, where different bits of functionality that belong together just end up in random places. Because there was so much coupling, people had to understand large parts of the system. You couldn't focus on just one small area. So the teams had a higher cognitive load, weren't deploying very often, and as a result of this, certain business processes were obviously, it was taking longer to build new features, but certain operational processes weren't very effective either. So Casper and his team went on that journey. They used some of the techniques I'll talk about shortly, and they were able to achieve these subdomain aligned value streams, teams with a lower cognitive load, able to make changes faster, on-demand deployments. And if you look over here on the right-hand side, they were able to make some major improvements to their operational processes. So they reduced the ingestion processing time by 80%. If you think about this whole process for calculating royalties, you've got music's being played thousands, tens of thousands of times per second. There's a lot of data coming in here. You've got to figure out fractions, who gets paid what, who owns the royalties for this. So ingestion has a big impact on the time. And then there's the matching, figuring out, we've got this song that was played over here. Is this the artist who should get paid some of that? That can take a long time too. I think they were able to automate that, help employees to be more productive. So they had those very clear business outcomes that were driving the architecture and were able to demonstrate that this investment in modernization was worth it. I think they even overachieved from what they expected before. If you have any more questions about that, I'm sure Casper would be very happy to talk to you. He's a very smart guy, knows a lot about these topics. Something else to think about here when you're modernizing, a very common idea I come across is we can just rebuild the old system in new tech. We talked about why that has advantages and disadvantages, but also there's something else important why you might not want to do that. And that is a lot of features in your old legacy system might not be used anymore or might not be worth modernizing. And if you modernize the whole system, you might spend a lot of time just wasted on things that don't need to be modernized. The study here from Pendo, don't know how much, how scientific this was or how much we can trust something like this, but what they reckon is 80% of the functionality in your legacy system is either never used or rarely used. So that's a very sobering number there, and a reason why we shouldn't just rewrite the old system and keep all the features. It sounds very easy sometimes, like, yeah, if we just make the new one work exactly as the old one, we don't have to think. We can just start developing tomorrow. In the long run, that can be very expensive, very wasteful, and it can miss opportunities. So I encourage people to think about modernization as different layers where you can modernize things. So we talked about the software and the infrastructure. Modernization there can have a big impact, but we can also take the opportunity to modernize the user experience. Don't just, I think one of the problems sometimes is, we modernize the old system and the developers will just build some new UI for it. If you're going to spend all that effort modernizing old systems, it makes sense to think about the user experience and take this opportunity to fix some of those issues. We then have the domain model. The domain model is how you think about your domain, how you model the concepts from your domain in the software and the language you use. And this is also a chance to improve your domain model. Like the example with Vinted. When they were modernizing, that was a great chance to not keep this domain model that was designed for women's clothing, but to make it more optimal for the different verticals they were supporting. And then there's the domain itself. Look at how people work and how people use your products and think, how can we change that? What can we automate? What processes can we make simpler? What new capabilities can we build here? If you're going through all this effort to modernize your system, it's crazy not to even think about these things. When I worked at the UK government in 2016, that's getting almost 10 years ago now. I'm starting to feel a bit old thinking about this one, but we did do this, went through all of these layers. We were talking about business property taxes, and we had a cross-functional team. We had user researchers in the team. They were going out every week talking to citizens. Do you like this? What problems do you have? Developers would get all that user research. Some developers would go into the research labs. The rest of us would watch videos of the user research highlights. And that had the whole team was just thinking about the user research, even the developers. That was having a big impact. And the domain itself, we had to try and do things in a digital-first way, or thinking about how technology has changed in the 100 years that these business rules have existed. So actually, it wasn't just implementing old business rules, it was how do we change the business rules, which were government policy, which was the law. So, modernization can go as deep as we're changing the law in this country. Doesn't have to, but it can if there's some value there. So those are some thoughts on how to, I think, get the right mindset for modernization in my perspective. Thinking broad, thinking deep, thinking about the different layers. And here are some tools that you can use to approach modernization in this way. So the first tool I recommend is listening. Great skill to have, more difficult than it sounds, but in particular, what I recommend is like a listening tour, where before you start talking about architecture and tech, just go and talk to lots of people in your company, all different kinds of stakeholders, and you'll find out lots of interesting things, like, we've got a 180-step process that nobody knew about. There's people using spreadsheets over here. That's quite interesting. You'll learn about how people are fudging old legacy systems just to get their jobs done. They have to jump between 3 legacy systems. On the user experience level we're talking about there. You'll hear frustrations that people will say things like, I've given up asking for this because I've been asking for 5 years. Nobody's ever done it, so I just get by how I can. It's a chance to identify all those needs, concerns, opportunities, and make sure you think about those when you're modernizing. The other point about this is it's a good way to build relationships, to get to know people. So when you are modernizing and you do have to make difficult decisions, people are more likely to understand or empathize with you. One of those big questions will be, should we do modernization work or should we do new feature work? That's always going to be there, always a constant struggle. So if you build these relationships early and you make people think or make them realize that you're trying to help them and build stuff for them, more likely to get alignment on that. It's very easy to do this wrong. I made a lot of mistakes myself. If you go into this interview and you say like, I've heard you're very unproductive at the moment, so we're going to use Salesforce to make you more productive. How does that sound? Well, you just told someone they're unproductive, not a very nice way to make friends, and you then told them the solution to their problem, which might not be their problem, and it might not be the solution they want. So I think really good advice here is just being able to have these open conversations. I actually quite enjoy it nowadays, just having unstructured conversations, seeing where things go. And then I think you learn to navigate these conversations. If the conversation's going one way and you're thinking, yeah, I want to understand what this person's top 5 priorities are, how can you get the conversation in that direction? You might say something like, oh, so would you say that's your top problem right now? Or how does that stack up with other things you're dealing with right now? It's a much more organic way, rather than just turning up at the meeting going, what are your top 5 problems? It's a bit direct. So just learning to navigate those conversations. Then we talked about business objectives. If you don't have business objectives, I think you could do some horribly dangerous things with modernization. I've met companies that have spent a year building a generic platform that can support all possible future use cases. The business are asking, why is this taking so long? Why have we delivered nothing? And the developers are like, well, people in the business often talk about moving into new markets. They've been talking about this for 5 years. We're not sure if they're going to do it or not. So we just thought we'd build a generic system in case they did agree to that. So this can work both ways. Leaders, strategists, they might be giving mixed signals. And I think it's important to try and get some clarity before you start modernizing. So that brings me to the second tool. And you can use this in those listening sessions. I like impact mapping, but there are other tools you can use. But what you really want to get is those top-level business objectives. What's most important? Is it new revenue, new customers, or cutting costs? And as you do this with different stakeholders, you'll get different answers. There might not be a single clear priority. Your job might be trying to get them to agree, trying to bring those stakeholders together and agree, what are we trying to optimize for here? So with impact mapping, you start with those big business goals. You figure out which actors are involved and what are you going to do to try and make a contribution towards those objectives. So example, here was the accuracy rate, like we saw in Casper's example. And then deliverables would be, what are the actual modernization initiatives, the actual changes you're going to make to achieve those impacts? So if you're in a meeting and you're talking about goals and you're trying to get some clarity, it can be a good way to say, okay, let's impact map this discussion. Let's add some structure. The third tool is kind of similar, but goes into a bit more granularity around your architecture. So with a Wardley map, you create value chains. You start with your users, you identify the needs, and then you look at the different parts of your architecture that fit together to enable those user needs. So in this example, we have a customer who wants to buy some food. They use the mobile app, which talks to the ordering service, which runs on a cloud platform. Pretty simple idea, nothing too revolutionary so far. But what happens next is where things get interesting. And this is something you would want to do with your stakeholders to get some clarity. So then you start to map each of those components in terms of evolution. So on the left of a Wardley map, a component in Genesis would be something brand new that your company's developing. You might not know if this is a good feature or not. You're still trying to validate the idea. As you get to the right-hand side, you get to the commodity end. This is an old, boring feature. It's a table stakes feature. It's either something customers just expect to be there, or maybe it's not even necessary anymore. So by going through this exercise, you can then start to make sensible modernization decisions based on the input you're getting from these different stakeholders about how they view these different components. Things more towards the left, there's still chance to evolve these components. Innovation's important here. So speed is something we want to modernize for. Towards the right-hand side, innovation is slowing down or has stopped here. So we really want to have those capabilities for the least amount of cost. So how can we reduce the number of people working on them? How can we reduce the complexity? Can we switch to an off-the-shelf tool? These are the kind of conversations you'll have in this in this kind of workshop format when you use a tool like Wardley mapping. And that can really help you to prioritize your modernization initiative and make sure you're spending the right amount of time in the right area. Because if you start modernizing and people are asking questions like, why are they spending 6 months modernizing that old thing? Nobody even cares about that anymore. Those are the kind of things you want to get ahead of and anticipate. But with Wardley mapping, you don't want to make decisions just based on the current position of a component. You also want to think about, how is this component evolving? So what we know with the Wardley map is that everything moves from the left to the right. It starts with a new exciting idea, ends up as an old boring table stakes thing that customers just expect. But the key question to ask is, how quickly are things evolving? How quickly is each component evolving? And why? What's causing components to evolve? So this example here, if all of your competitors are trying to build this same component, there's going to be a high level of competition in the industry there. And you might expect it to evolve very quickly over 1 year or 2 years. And so even though it seems important now, by the time you finish modernizing, it might not be important anymore. So this can help you, again, to decide to not get sucked into, this is how we make money now. This is what people are talking about now. This must be important. No, actually, what's going to be important over the next few years? Obviously, we can't predict the future. We can never anticipate the future. But we can make educated guesses collectively and decide what do we feel like might happen, and how do we shape our architecture, how do we prioritize modernization based on how things are likely to play out. If you like all this stuff, you might like Barry O'Reilly's talk about residuality theory. He also has lizards that destroy London in it, so a bit of a side point there. So let's talk about tool 4. This is event storming. So far, we've kind of looked at modernization from a high level, from a strategic point of view, understanding goals and priorities, looking at individual components, but not really getting into the details. And you can't modernize without understanding the details, about knowing where the complexity is, knowing where the pain points are. And that's where event storming is probably my favorite technique here, a very popular technique. And it's a technique that you would use to map out a part of your business in different levels of detail. It could be high level to begin with, but also more granular, more in-depth. This room is actually a great space for event storming. You could have an amazing event storming session here. This is the kind of space you want for event storming. You can map out this whole business workflow, get into the details, and start asking those questions. Where are your pain points? Why are there some features in our product that don't appear on the event storm? Oh, we don't use those anymore. This is how you can start to answer those questions. In the workshop, you can have your users, you can have all different kinds of domain experts, people who work in sales, marketing, product managers, developers, testers. You can get all kinds of people in there. That's the benefit of this, mapping out your business with all these different perspectives to get a true picture and not someone's biased picture. There's also process modeling event storming. This is a great tool when you're looking at the future state, when you want to work out, okay, we've mapped out the legacy, we've mapped out all these inefficiencies and manual processes. How should the new system work? When we build this modernized architecture, what functionality should it have? How should the business processes work? Event storming is also a great way to start shaping your modernized architecture. Once you've mapped out a business as these orange events on the timeline, you can then start to say, where do we see the different transition points? How would we group these events into subdomains? How might we split this up into different parts of our architecture? Which clusters of events might be sensible for a team to own? And again, you can do this with all your domain experts there. So it's not just technical people guessing, it's an informed decision. So the 5th tool and the final tool I'd like to talk about is, well, there's another tool, but that's not one of the 5, but it's going to be another one in a sec. Basically, you need some way to prioritize your investment in different parts of your system. If you take the approach of, let's rebuild the old system with the best possible architecture across the whole system, it will take a long time, it will cost a lot of money, and and you probably won't finish it because it will just get to a point where people are saying, this is taking too long, let's stop, and you'll have another legacy system and still the one before that. So I like to think about this in two different ways. How much do you want to modernize the tech, and how much do you want to modernize the functionality and the design of your software? Towards the bottom left, you've got things like sunset, just get rid of it. And then you've got like legacy encapsulate. Legacy encapsulate is basically, we have to keep the old legacy system, but we just want to expose an API or a domain event from it. So a minimum amount of investment, a small tweak, because we still need to use it in some way. As you get to the top right-hand corner, you're changing the whole tech stack, the whole infrastructure stack. You're completely rethinking how the product works. And that could be a bigger investment, but sometimes that can actually be a lower investment because the old system's so complex, just starting from a blank canvas could be the simplest approach. But there are lots of risks there as well. So yeah, I think about this in different levels. With the tech side, you've got the infrastructure, programming language, data, and libraries and frameworks. At what level in each part of your system do you modernize the tech? And then on the functionality side, you've got expose. Expose some existing capability. You've got polish, which is, just tweak it, make some small improvements so it's less painful. Then you've got replicate, rebuild the old system in a new tech stack, so you keep all the existing functionality. And then you've got remodel, which is we're going to keep similar functionality, but modernize it with a brand new domain model that will enable us to move faster in the future. And then you have rethink, which is completely rethink how the product works. That's where you're changing business rules, changing government laws in your country. It can go that far. So the other tool I was mumbling about a few seconds ago is not in the official top 5. I'm still using this and learning more about this tool, but I think it will be a very important tool. I know companies are using this, and it's CodeScene. You can do some very interesting things with CodeScene. It can analyze your system and help you to identify where the complexity is and where the code changes. It can give you some clues about which parts of your system change together, that hidden coupling we talked about. I used this recently with a company earlier this year, and the CTO, he used it to answer the question, should we fire all of our contractors to save some money? And basically, if you're a contractor, you're going to like this story, because he worked out, there are some parts of our system that only the contractors have worked on it. With CodeScene, it tells you which of your employees have worked on which parts of the system. And he's like, if we fire those contractors, then we lose all that knowledge about those parts of the system. So yeah, I recommend checking out CodeScene. I'm not at the point where I can say you should definitely use it, but I'm getting closer to that point. So the third and final part of this talk is how, if you're struggling to get started, or if you're struggling to keep up your modernization journey, here are some thoughts that I find are quite useful. So firstly, a couple of caveats. I don't advocate that you would do this Wardley mapping and event storming across your whole system. It can take a lot of time to do that, so you do need to be effective and efficient with your time. On the other hand, I do encourage companies to try and deliver something within 3 to 6 months to show the value, to validate ideas, and to start learning. So there's a balance there. If you start modernizing too quickly, you might not have chance to identify some key insights. You might go too far in the wrong direction. You might make a big mistake, and the whole modernization is like, we're not doing that. So balance is crucial as always. Choosing that first slice, there's a lot to think about here. You might have tried something, it didn't work. You might think, we'll do it the opposite way next time. But my experience is the opposite way is probably wrong as well and can also fail. So with this chart, you can start to visualize where you might start or what you might do next. So the bottom right-hand corner, you've got something that's very valuable and it's very simple. So that would be an obvious starting point. But in reality, nothing really falls in that bottom right. And you need to decide, do we want to go in the top right? Do we want to take something that's a bit more complex and a bit more risky as our first slice? Things could go wrong here. There's more unknowns. Or do we go to the bottom left and pick something a bit simpler and a bit safer? if you go to the bottom left, you have that feeling of safety, but then other people in the company might start asking, why have you picked something to modernize that's not valuable? I don't see why you're spending 6 months and a lot of money modernizing something not interesting to me as a product person. If you go to the top right-hand corner, you can end up hitting all kinds of problems, and it takes much longer than expected, and that's not a good way to start your modernization. I know one company, they did go for the top right-hand corner. They were very keen to show some value early, and this question that you might find in your journey is, we have to build something new. We want to deliver some new features in the next 6 months. Do we build it in the old stack, or do we build this as part of modernization? And the problem is, if you build it in your new modernized stack and you commit to a deadline, there's a lot of chances you'll miss that deadline. The company I'm talking about thought, it should take 3 months to build this. We've got 6 months. We'll definitely build it in a modernized stack. There's no risk at all here. 1 year later, they still didn't have any modernized code in production. They're still arguing over things like getting their cloud services to talk to their on-prem data. So what's my advice here? Just think about all the options, really. Think very carefully. Discuss with your different stakeholders. Be very careful with this choice. Something else I would recommend as you're starting out is in-person workshops. So me and my friend Eduardo, we call these Kickstarter workshops. And what we're trying to do is to get that first slice of modernization started. So the idea of these workshops is to touch on everything I mentioned in the talk, to have some clear business objectives, to map out a part of the business with the event storm, to start identifying what might be those first value streams, those first subdomains, how teams might be organized around this, discussing ways of working, how will the teams work in this new modernized world, and to try and come out of this workshop with a 3-month roadmap, maybe some longer term milestones as well, but really thinking, let's start delivering. Let's try and deliver that first piece in those next 3 months. And when you get everyone together in a room and things go well, it can go really well. It can be a real mindset shift. People can start saying things like, yeah, we've never done things like this before. We've never done event storming. We've always had silos between product and tech, and this idea of collaboration is just new and exciting. And that can make people think, actually, this whole modernization thing we're doing, it is going to be different. It is exciting. I'm going to put my best into it and believe it. Because a lot of people will be skeptical. We've tried this before. We don't have the skills to do this. We should outsource to a consultancy who know what they're doing. These kind of workshops can be a real changing point, a real turning point, let's say. So this example here, this was one I alluded to earlier. This is the end of the first day. We mapped out this whole process. The yellow strips across the top are different subdomains. I think what was really interesting about this one was sales and marketing were quite influential in this one. And in the workshop, we also had the company CEO and a COO floating around. That can be risky sometimes. But they even were like, wow, I've been like CEO of this company for 20 years and we've never done anything like this before. So this can even be a turning point for those kind of people. The leadership who are maybe sitting on the fence about, should I give the CTO some money to modernize, yes or no? Do I trust him or her? But those workshops, I do think those workshops can be very valuable, very exciting. But what can happen in a lot of cases is you do the workshop, you make the plans, and it's like, we're not going to do it, or things don't get moving. So you really have to be thinking, after this workshop, we need to keep this momentum high. Because if you don't, then people will go back to the old mindset. Oh, same as before. We started this new thing, we talked about modernizing, and now we're not doing it. So next time they talk about this, I'm not going to bother. I'm not even going to come to the next workshop. So what we recommend, me and my colleague Eduardo, is the concept of an architecture modernization enabling team. If you've read team topologies and you know about the concept of an enabling team, it's a short-lived team or it's a temporary team. It can live for a long time. But the idea is this team exists to help achieve a certain objective. So an AMET isn't a team that would own parts of the system. It's a team of people that would help other teams to achieve their objectives. And in those early stages, the AMET will be playing that important role of organize the workshop, make sure after the workshop that things keep moving. It's not only a team for architects, it's a team for different skills. You can have product people in there. But what I would emphasize is that enabling mindset is very different. If you're an architect and you want to work in an AMET, or you're being asked to work in an AMET, you really need to have good coaching and facilitation skills. Sometimes you do need to step forward and show how to design good architecture. But sometimes you need to step back and allow others to make mistakes, or make decisions for themselves, even if it takes longer. And that, some are good at that, some people take longer, but I really believe everyone can adopt that mindset. I think at the end of the day, if you want to be effective in an AMET, your mindset has to be, I want to keep this modernization moving, I'm motivated to make it work, and I have some emotion or some desire to help other people be successful. It's not about me taking all the credit. My job is to help other people be successful. So that's basically it. We're going to have some questions in a minute, if there are any. If you do have any questions, you'll need to come to this microphone here. I thought I was going to forget to say that, but I'll quickly do a wrap-up. So firstly, this concept of modernization is kind of inevitable, really. As companies get successful, they get bigger, they expand into new markets. The system they built in the past doesn't support what they're trying to do at the moment. And you're at risk of competitors that can start with a blank canvas. They can adopt the latest tech, they can see what you've done, they can copy your products, and they can innovate much faster than you can. So modernization is really about being a successful company that can compete with these younger, fresher, smaller companies that can move faster, in my opinion. And modernization is more than just upgrading the tech and infrastructure stack. It's a chance to rethink the abstractions, the domain model, how you work, your architecture mindset, your functionality, your UX. It's a chance to address all of those things. You will need lots of tools to do modernization effectively. Here are 5 that I would say, I picked out these 5 because I use them a lot myself, and I think maybe these are tools that aren't as common as they should be. So these 5 can be very effective. They touch on different parts of modernization, understanding people's needs, getting clarity on business goals, understanding how your components fit into the strategy, understanding how your business really works, getting all those perspectives, and making good portfolio decisions. And then finally, upfront planning is one of those things that you can feel, I would say, a lot of people feel like they lack confidence. They start to do lots of upfront planning because they're worried of making a mistake. But one thing I often encounter is people don't have a clear understanding of what is enough upfront. When will I be confident? Because if you're waiting to be 100% confident, you'll never get there. You've got to decide, what do I need to see to feel confident to make a decision and start moving? And I think a lot of the time you can start modernizing sooner than you think and do a bit less upfront. And that's why I think the 3 to 6 months constraint is a really good enabling constraint. If you try and set yourself that target of delivering in 3 to 6 months, it can help you balance the need to do a lot of upfront planning. And as I talked about at the end here, those in-person Kickstarter workshops, when they work out well, and they often do, can get things started in a real exciting way and an effective way. And if you're thinking about how do I keep modernization moving, how do I stop it getting stuck, that's where teams like AMETs can be really helpful. So I did write a book about this, and I've got 2 copies here. I'm not sure how to give these out. Maybe a question. Can anyone think of any other tools they would add to this list? 2 people that want to share something I didn't talk about that you would add. Yep.
Is it the fig strangle pattern or whatever the hell it's called?
Yeah. So didn't talk about that in this talk, but that is also. So he was I should have asked you to go to the mic there, but I'll repeat for you. He was talking about the strangler fig pattern, and That's a crucial part of modernization because you're going to have to migrate from your existing architecture to the new architecture, usually in a gradual way. The strangler fig's one pattern that enables you to do that, to migrate in an incremental way or an iterative way. There are other patterns as well, like the bubble context in DDD. I've covered this in some of my other talks. It's in here as well, if you want to read that. But there's a whole other category of problems there, because now you've got the old system and the new system in parallel, and what can happen a lot of the time is the new one never gets finished. So now you have two legacy systems, so that's another crucial area I didn't talk about here, so one of these is yours.
Thank you.
Anyone else have something that they would add to this list of tools? Or just general topics I didn't talk about today? I think you were first.
Yeah, like C4 diagrams.
C4 diagrams, yeah, definitely. So C4 diagrams, a technique popularized by Simon Brown. It's a way to view your architecture at different levels of detail. And when you build C4 diagrams, you can then start to apply techniques like risk storming and ask people, where are your biggest concerns here? It can be used for the current state or the future states. And when you're doing those listening tours and you're going around the company, a lot of those sessions will be with technical people. And if you haven't worked in that part of the system yourself, you can use C4 as a way to start. I'm holding this like a mic. It's not a mic. Why am I doing that? How long have I been doing that? The C4 is a great technique. Like you're an architect in an AMET. You want to help some team in that area. You haven't worked in that area before. C4 is a great way to start getting them to describe their architecture. And then you can use that to decide, we might need to get into the code here. That seems very complex. We'll dig in there. Or some parts might seem less complex. So C4 is a great one. Do you want to come and get this, or do you want to get it later? It's up to you. Okay. Thank you. So that's basically everything. If you want to keep in touch, here are all my details. And if you've got any advice for not holding clickers like their microphones, I probably need some of that too. And thanks for coming.